Hi students, welcome to lesson 32, Tribal Movements in India. Indian Adivasi inhabitants or tribal population comprise about 8.2% of Indian population. Adivasis are the original inhabitants of the land. The tribal habitat and culture provide the tribal community a sense of freedom, self-identity and respect. It also facilitates and empowers them to remain united against any kind of exploitation, oppression and harassment by non-tribals. There are several tribal uprisings in tribal history of India against the exploiters. After completion of this lesson, you will be able to understand the causes and consequences of tribal movements. You will be able to explain the various tribal movements in India. Let us now discuss about some tribal movements. Tribal movements in India are highly diversified, yet there are common factors in tribal movements in India. The tribal movements are responses to various factors as put forward by B.K. Roy Burman, that is, response to threats to the privacy of habitat, threats to access to and control of resources, disruption of traditional roles in the total interaction setup, search for new meanings of the relationship between man and nature, quest for new meaning of the relationship between individuals and society, search for new frontiers of identity, search for a more satisfactory system of control of resources and search for a more satisfactory system of organization of community power at all levels. Let us now discuss about the causes of tribal movements. According to L.K. Mahapatra, a renowned anthropologist, it is possible to classify tribal movements in India before 1947, which can be categorized into three types. The first type is called the reactionary movement. It attempted to oppose political or social reform by the tribes, mostly in the context of mixture with non-tribes. Such movement was mostly seen among the tribals living a simple and isolated life in forest. Whenever they saw alien groups creating obstacles in their life, they became offensive and tried to bring back the good old days. The second type is conservative, which opposed any kind of changes in tribal life and culture and sought to maintain status quo. The third type is revolutionary, that aimed to replace certain traits of their traditional culture or social order with a progressive one. This movement is also termed as revivalist, as the leaders of such movements also sought to purify certain elements of culture by eliminating evil customs, beliefs and institutions. Apart from these, there are several other attempts to classify tribal movements. For instance, Kumar Suresh Singh has suggested a fourfold classification which is based on 4 parameters. Firstly, political autonomy, example Jharkhand movement. Secondly, agrarian, example Santhal movement and forest based issues like coal movement. Thirdly, Sanskritization, example Bhagat movement, and fourthly, cultural movements for script and language, example Bhil movement. S.M. Dubey has classified these movements into 4 categories, namely religious and social reform movements, secondly movements for separate statehood, thirdly insurgent movements and fourthly cultural rights movements. Ghanshyam Shah too has categorized them in 3 groups, which are ethnic, agrarian and political. According to Roy and Debel, destruction of forests as a consequence of Felling of trees for industrial purposes has threatened the small communities of hunters and food gatherers. In spite of some rehabilitation and resettlement programs, a large section of the tribals became the victims of development projects, and they could not also adequately adapt themselves with new challenges. Let us identify the major causes of tribal movements in India. The tribals' mainstay was shifting agriculture, hunting, fishing, and the use of forest produce. With the influx of non-tribals into traditional regions of the tribals, the practice of settled agriculture was introduced. This led to loss of land for the tribal population. The tribals were reduced to being landless agricultural laborers. The British introduced money lenders into the tribal areas, which led to severe exploitation of the local tribals. They became bonded laborers under the new economic system. The tribal societies had a system of joint ownership of land, which was replaced by the notion of private property. There were restrictions imposed on the use of forest produce, on shifting agriculture, and on hunting practices. This led to the loss of livelihood for the tribals. Tribal society was traditionally egalitarian compared to mainstream society, which was marked by caste and class distinctions. With the coming of non-tribals or outsiders, the tribals came to be classified under the lowest rungs of the society. A forest department was set up in 1864 by the government mainly to control the rich resources of Indian forests. The Government Forest Act of 1865 and Indian Forest Act of 1878 established complete government monopoly over the forest land. The work of the Christian missionaries also led to social upheaval in tribal society, and this was also resented by them. So, the basic issues behind the tribal movements in India after independence are land alienation, unemployment, deprivation, cultural submergence, and unbalanced development. The literature on tribal movements indicate that tribals adopted two paths of achieving goals. Firstly, non-violent path of bargaining and negotiating with the government and using a variety of pressure tactics without resorting to violence or revolts. Secondly, militant path of revolts or mass struggles based on developing the fighting power of the exploited, oppressed tribal strata. The tribes of India have always protested against any acquisition of their land and exerted their rights over forest resources. In recent times, displacement due to industrial and developmental projects has affected them the most. There have also been movements for social, cultural and political reasons. Let us discuss few prominent tribal movements in India. Beginning with Santhal movement between 1855 and 1856. Santhals are mainly concentrated in Chota Nagpur Plateau, Jharkhand and its bordering areas of Bihar and West Bengal. Santhals were basically agriculturalists. The seeds of the Santhal peasant revolt were sown in 1793 when the Britishers introduced the permanent land system. This took away lands from the Santhals which they had owned from centuries. The Britishers provided land on auction to the zamindars and peasants. The common peasantry was exploited badly by increasing the land tax by the zamindars and the Britishers. On the other hand, the common peasantry was also exploited by the money lenders. The causes of Santhal movement are high rate of interest charged by the money lenders, physical torture and violence by zamindars. Santals were forced to pay all kinds of levies and taxes. In case of non-payment, they were abused and disposed of their property. Trespassing on the land of Santals, torture, cruelty and oppression by the Britishers were also the causes of Santhal rebellion. The Santals turned against the British government since the latter were protecting the oppressors of the Santals. Under the leadership of two Santhal brothers, Sidhu and Kanhu, this tribal movement gained momentum. The rebels cut off the postal and railway communication between Bhagalpur and Rajmahal and proclaimed the end of Company's rule and commencement of the Santhal regime. They attacked the houses of the moneylenders, zamindars, white planters, railway engineers and British officials. The open war with British continued till February 1856, when the rebel leaders were finally captured and the movement was put down with a great deal of repression. It was due to Santhal movement that the British government recognized the tribal status of the Santhals. The entire Santhal concentration area was known as Santhal Parganas. It was a movement which the Santhals gave a message to the entire peasantry of the country to rebel against the moneylenders and zamindars. Let us now discuss about Khond uprising. The Khonds lived in vast hill tracts stretching from Tamil Nadu to Bengal, covering central provinces and in virtual independence due to inaccessible mountainous terrain. Their uprisings from 1837 to 1856 were directed against the British, in which the tribals of Ghumsar, Chainaki Medi, Kalahandi and Patna actively participated. The movement was led by Chakra Bisoi in the name of Young Raja. The main issue was the attempt by the government to suppress human sacrifice, that is Maria, and introduction of new taxes by the British and influx of zamindars and sahukars, that is money lenders, into their areas, which was causing the tribals untold misery. The British formed a Maria agency against which the Khonds fought with Tangi, a king of battle axe, bows, arrows and even swords. Later, Savaras and some local militia clans also joined in, led by Radha Krishna Dandasena. Chakra Bisoi disappeared in 1855, after which the movement petered out. Let us now talk about Bhils and Kolis uprisings. The Bhils were concentrated in the hill ranges of Khandesh in previous Maratha territory. British occupation of this region in 1818 brought in the outsiders and accompanying dislocations in their community life. A general Bhil insurrection in 1817 to 1819 was crushed by the British military forces, and though some conciliatory measures were taken to pacify them, they again revolted under the leadership of Seva Ramin 1825, and the situation remained unsettled until 1831, when the Ramosi leader Umaji Raje of Purandar was finally captured and executed. Minor revolts again took place in 1836 and 1846 as well. The Bhils' local rivals for power, the Kolis of Ahmednagar district, also challenged the British in 1829 but were quickly subdued by a large army contingent. The seeds of rebellion, however, persisted to erupt again in 1844-1846 when a local Koli leader successfully defied the British government for 2 years. Let us now discuss about Munda movement. Munda is one of the prominent tribes of Chota Nagpur region. Birsa Munda led this movement in the region south of Ranchi in 1899-900. The Ulgulan, meaning the Great Tumult, sought to establish Munda Raj and independence. The Mundas traditionally enjoyed a preferential rent rates as the Khunt Katidar or the original clearer of the forest. But in course of the 19th century, they had seen this Khunt Kati land system being eroded by the Jagirdars, that is landlords, and Thekedars, that is contractors, coming as merchants and money lenders. This process of land alienation had begun long before the advent of the British. But the establishment and consolidation of British rule accelerated the mobility of the non-tribal people into the tribal regions. The incidence of forced labor or bet begari also increased dramatically. Unscrupulous contractors, moreover, had turned the region into a recruiting ground for indentured labor. Yet, another change associated with British rule was the appearance of number of Lutheran, Anglican and Catholic missions. The spread of education through missionary activities made the tribals more organized and conscious of their rights. Tribal solidarity was undermined as the social cleavage between the Christian and non-Christian Mundas deepened. The agrarian discontent and the advent of Christianity therefore helped the revitalization of the movement which sought to reconstruct the tribal society disintegrating under the stresses and strains of colonial rule. The movement sought the assertion of the rights of the Mundas as the real proprietors of the soil. This ideal agrarian order, according to Birsa, would be possible in a world free from the influence of European officials and missionaries, thus necessitating the establishment of the Munda Raj. The rebels attacked police stations and officials, churches and missionaries, and though there was an undercurrent of hostility against the Dikus, there was no overt attack on them except in a couple of controversial cases. However, the rebels were defeated. Birsa was captured and died in jail. Nearly 350 Mundas were put on trial, and of them 3 were hanged and 44 transported for life. The government attempted to redress the grievances of the Mundas through the survey and settlement operations of 1902 to 1910. The Chota Nagpur Tenancy Act of 1908 provided some recognition to their Khuntakatti rights and banned Bet Begari, which was forced labor. Chota Nagpur tribals won a degree of legal protection for their land rights. The UN Debar Commission in 1961 has asserted that the inception of settlement and survey operations in Ranchi district was a direct outcome of the Birsa movement. Let us now discuss about Koya uprising. In Orissa, the Sauras of Koraput waged an armed revolt in Pittasinghi in July 1864. Later in 1922, there was an uprising among the Koyas and Konds led by Alluri Sitarama Raju, which continued till 1924. In Andhra Pradesh, 4 major revolts broke out, not all during the British regime. The first is the Koya uprising in the Rampa area of East Godavari Agency, popularly known as Rampa Fituri Rebellion. The second one happened in 1879, next one in 1922. The last one occurred after independence during 1967-68, which is a part of Naxalite revolt. the Rampa Rebellion of 1922 under the leadership of Alluri Sitarama Raju, the tribal movement was fought against British as a protest to the 1882 Madras Forest Act in Vishakhapatnam. As per the act, tribal people were restricted on the free movement in the forest areas and prevented them from engaging in their traditional podu, that is shifting cultivation and use of the forest for firewood and toddy. The revolt lasted till Alluri Sitarama Raju was shot dead by the British forces in Mampa village of Vishakhapatnam on May 7, 1924. Let us now discuss about Mizo movement. Before the formation of Mizoram state in 1987, the Mizo dominated areas in India were a part of the Mizo district of Assam state. The Mizo organizations, including the Mizo Union, had long complained of stepmotherly treatment at the hands of the Assam government and demanded a separate state for the Mizos, that is Lushai tribes. Every 48 years, a cyclic ecological phenomenon called Mautam leads to widespread famine in this region. When such a famine started in 1959, the Mizos were left disappointed by the Assam government's handling of the situation. The introduction of the Assamese as the official language of the state in 1960 without any consideration for the Mizo language led to further discontent and protests. The growing discontent with government ultimately resulted in a secessionist movement led by Mizo National Front MNF, an organization that had evolved out of a famine relief team. While the Mizo Union's demand was limited to a separate state for the Mizos within India, the MNF aimed at establishing a sovereign Christian nation for the Mizos. The extremist section within MNF advocated the use of violence to seek independence from India. A special armed wing called Mizo National Army MNA was created for the purpose. Jagdish Patnaik, in his book Mizoram Dimensions and Perspective, published in 2008, says that in the early 1960s, the MNF leaders including Pu Lal Denga visited East Pakistan, now Bangladesh, where the government of East Pakistan offered them supply of military hardware and training. Lal Denga and his lieutenant Pu Lalun Mavia were arrested by the government of Assam on the charge of conspiring against the nation, but were released in February 1964 after an undertaking of good conduct by Lal Denga. However, shortly after their release, MNF intensified its secessionist activities. The Mizo National Front was outlawed in 1967. The same year, the counter-insurgency and jungle warfare school was set up at Verante to train the soldiers in fighting with the rebels in the northeast India. As the insurgents found security and refuge in the large number of tiny hamlets from which they would launch attacks on the patrols of the security forces and later merge into civilian population, the military need was felt to deny the militants access to the common people. To solve the problem, the government of India resorted to a grouping policy in the Mizo district starting in January 1967. Before executing this policy, Mizoram being predominantly Christian, the church was taken into confidence. Based on their recommendations, Army agreed to provide help in dismantling, move and relocation of the people in smaller hamlets as well as material help in reconstruction. In August 1968, the government of India offered amnesty to the insurgents, which resulted in the surrender of 1524 MNF members. This was followed by more amnesty offers during 1969-1970. Later, the Mizo Union's negotiations with Union government resulted in Mizo district gaining the status of Union territory as Mizoram on 21st January 1972. MNF's secessionist movement came to an end in 1976 when it signed the Mizo Accord with the Government of India. The government agreed to create a separate state for the Mizos called Mizoram with Aizawl as its capital. MNF in return decided to give up its secessionist demand and the use of violence. The formalization of the state of Mizoram took place on 20th February 1987. Pu Lal Denga was the Chief Minister of Mizoram state in northeastern India from 1986 till 1988. Let us now discuss about Naga movement. The British, who annexed Assam in 1826, constituted the Naga Hills district in 1866 and followed a policy of non-interference towards the hill tribes. As British paramountcy in India ended, A.Z. Fizo, President of the Naga National Council (NNC), declared independence on August 14, 1947. Fizo was arrested in 1948 by the Indian government on charges of rebellion. On his release, Fizo was made the president of NNC in 1950. In 1952, he met Jawaharlal Nehru, the then Prime Minister of India, to chalk out pathway for Naga's independence. The meeting was unsuccessful, with both the parties remaining steadfast to their viewpoints and demands. The Indian army then marched in to suppress the rebellion and track down Fizo. However, Fizo managed to escape to East Pakistan and from there to London, where he remained in exile till his death in 1990. The armed rebellion continued, led by a section of the NNC leaders. An agreement was reached by the Indian government and the NNC in the year 1975. This came to be known as the Shillong Accord, which some leaders in the NNC called as total betrayal, including Isaac Wu, the Muava and Kaplang. This led to the formation of the Nationalist Socialist Council of Nagaland, or the NSCN, in late 1970s under the leadership of Isaac Shisuwu, Thumlin Muava and Kaplang. The National Socialist Council of Nagaland was formed on January 31st, 1980 by Isaac Chisiwu. Muava and SS Kaplang, opposing the Shillong Accord signed by the then Naga National Council with the Government of India. Later, misunderstandings surfaced within the outfit leaders over the issue of commencing negotiation dialogue with the Indian government, and on April 30th, 1988, the NSCN split into two factions, the NSCN-K led by S. Kaplang and NSCN-IM led by Isaac Chisiwu, and Muava. The split triggered spat of violence and factional clashes between the factions. It started an underground Naga federal government having both civil and military wings. It again split into two factions in the late 1980s, the NSCN-IM and the NSCN Kaplang. In 1992, the then Governor M.M. Thomas, a clergyman from Kerala, made the first successful move to get in touch with the NSCN. On June 15, 1995, then Prime Minister Shri P.V. Narasimha Rao first met Mueva and Wu in Paris. A ceasefire was agreed upon with the government of India with effect from August 1997. Subsequently, former Prime Minister Shri H.D. Deve Gowda in February 1997, former Prime Minister Shri Atal Bihari Vajpayee in September 1998 and former Prime Minister Dr. Manmohan Singh in December 2004 also met them. At least 50 rounds of talks have been held between the two sides at various levels. While recognizing the cultural distinctiveness of Nagas, Jayaprakash Narayan, who travelled extensively in Nagaland and in 1965 published Nagaland Mein Shanti Ka Prayas, The Prospects for Peace in Nagaland, urged them to be part of India. He met leaders of the underground and advised them to shed their arms and contest elections and thus take over the administration by peaceful means. In the late 80s, the Swedish journalist Bertil Lintner travelled in the Naga borderlands. Lintner gave the rebels the same advice as Jayaprakash Narayan, that is, to accept and deepen provincial autonomy. The government of India under the leadership of Prime Minister Shri Narendra Modi on August 3, 2015 signed a historic peace accord with leading Naga separatist group Nationalist Socialist Council of Nagaland, Isaac Mueva. Now let us talk about Tana Bhagat movement between 1914 to 1919. Tana Bhagat movement was a tribal uprising of a section of Tana Bhagats and the Orauns under the leadership of Jatra Oraon, occurring during the late colonial period in the Chota Nagpur region of Bihar, India. The Tana Bhagats opposed the taxes imposed on them by the British and they staged a satyagraha, that is, civil disobedience movement, even before Gandhiji's satyagraha movement. They opposed the zamindars, the baniyas, that is, moneylenders, the missionaries and the British. Tana Bhagats are followers of Mahatma Gandhi and believe in ahimsa, that is, non-violence. Dear students, let us now summarize this lesson. The tribal movements in India are highly diversified with reasons being varied. The Santhal and the Munda movement were due to exploitation. The Gonds in Madhya Pradesh and Mahars in Andhra Pradesh revolted due to economic deprivation. The tribal movements due to separatist tendencies are exemplified by those of the Nagas and Mizos. The tribal movement seeking political autonomy and formation of a state is epitomized by Nagas, Mizos and Jharkhand movements. Tribal movements in India is the result of oppression and exploitation of the tribals by non-tribals, which was retaliated earlier through disorganized force and later through organized peace movements or through militant groups.